Hello, I'm Paul Turner from Lancaster University Management School, and as part of the Digital Leaders event, I'm here to discuss the white paper, The Importance of Social Engagement in Putting 5G Connectivity Infrastructures in Place, with authors Professor Katy Mason and Dr. Sharon Wagg, also from Lancaster University. Katy is the chair of the British Academy of Management, and her research looks at how our marketised society can collectively construct inclusive and moral markets. Sharon's PhD focused on digital inclusion initiative provision in the UK rural communities. They are both part of the Mobile Access North Yorkshire MANY project, a 5G testbed and trial initiative developing a 5G digital economy infrastructure in North Yorkshire. Firstly, Katy, can you give us a quick summary of the nature of the MANY project?
Yeah, so as you said, Paul, quite rightly, we're interested in putting in our 5G technologies, a digital infrastructure into North Yorkshire rural communities. So this is in places where there are trees, rocks, vast distances between small clusters of housing, which makes it impossible sometimes to put in more traditional digital infrastructures, but also very expensive. So quite often the big network companies don't like to invest such huge amounts of money when they've got such a small amount of customers. So these people have suffered from a digital deprivation, if you like, and this can lead to depleted communities because so much of our economy today is connected through the internet. It can have a big impact on how these places thrive and flourish. So we've been looking at 4 key use cases. Can we put in a digital infrastructure and use it to boost the tourism in the area? Can we help people be connected and support their well-being and mental health? Can we do better monitoring and advising around maybe floods or bridge or road closures to help keep people safe and secure? And can we create mission critical communications for emergency services? So we've been particularly working with mountain rescue, where they're in very remote areas, and actually digital connectivity could make the difference between finding somebody and getting somebody to hospital when they need help.
So the aim of the project has been described as to help very rural communities achieve socio-economic flourishing through improved connectivity. So how would you define flourishing in this sense, Katy?
That's a good question. So we tend to talk about socio-economic flourishing. So we don't differentiate having a good social life from a good economic life. So generally, we are better, healthier, happier where we're in communities that have these two things closely connected together. So for us, flourishing are about improvements in well-being, around business innovation, and around resilience and safety of our connected communities. And we use this as our overarching aim of the project.
So Sharon, what did your findings reveal about people's experiences of connectivity, their hopes for what 5G might provide, their concerns about the project?
Certainly, yeah. So we interviewed quite like a few people within the community, and they talked about first of all their current like connectivity that they have and their experiences. And so these were very different. Even though this is quite a small community, those experiences actually varied enormously. So some of them actually already had quite good connectivity, but actually for most of them, actually it was very poor, it was unreliable. It kind of made their life difficult. It had an impact on their home life, on work, on schooling, particularly during this time of COVID as well, where there's been like an increase of homeschooling as well. So it just added time to things which perhaps we would take for granted, which we could do within like a few minutes. There was also the issue of if there were several people at home using like multiple like devices, that would have a huge impact on if more than one person trying to access the internet or get online or do any streaming, also any video conferencing as well. So if you had more than one person trying to work from home, trying to do like a meeting at the same time, it was almost like impossible for them really. So there were some of the main things which they talked about, but also because of so many services have now gone online, they also expressed issues in regards to trying to access online services, also issues in relation to dual factor authentication, where, for example, you might need to sort of access the internet. They'll say, right, we're going to send a code now to your phone. in the area, there is very poor, if not non-existent, the mobile phone connectivity. So unless they're within their house and can use like Wi-Fi calling, they can't get like a mobile phone like reception. So this was causing all sorts of problems. So again, talking a bit more about the mobile phone connectivity, as soon as they went outside of their homes, generally there's no mobile phone reception. What are the issues around that? So it was anything from people feeling unsafe, people feeling more isolated. Like, for example, if somebody went out on a mountain bike ride, what would happen if they had like an accident, or perhaps somebody from the farming like community, if they had an accident and they couldn't actually phone someone for help. So there are these kind of things as well. With regards to, but then also not everybody was unhappy with their like connectivity, and it's important to kind of raise this really, because so this talks about the different types of experiences that people have. But with regards to the hopes for having sort of improved connectivity in the area, quite simply, they just wanted to have reliable connectivity, so just to make their lives easier, so they can actually work without their sort of like meetings being disturbed. Also, it can then improve if they're doing any homeschooling at the same time, but also that improved safety as well. So it actually means that people can actually use like a mobile phone outside of the house. They can make those calls much quicker. There's also this appeal of attracting more people to the area, because one thing which people talked about was how the area has quite a few holiday homes, and so during the season where people aren't actually there was this notion of like hollowing out. And so actually, could it be more, can we attract people to actually live in these communities, to then live there and work and bring young people to those areas as well? But with all of this, there were also concerns. So because we're calling this a 5G project, quite a few people were going, well, what is 5G? They didn't understand fully what 5G actually meant. And they had concerns around that. And also, so they had questions around what is 5G, but also the visual impact of what the 5G equipment would bring to the area. So they often talked about masts that were being put up into the area, which we can talk about in more detail in a moment, and what tech was required for them to be able to access this 5G. And do we actually need 5G when, you know, we can probably just use like 3G and 4G? And there was also this impact of, well, what will the impact be on the wider like community as well? So currently they feel that the community is quite cohesive, but if you bring in sort of improved connectivity, will it then actually introduce this almost eyes down like community where everyone's looking at the phone rather than talking to people and engaging with people? So these were the kind of things which we captured through our interviews.
Yeah, so there's obviously a broad range of feelings, both positive and some negative, some caution there. How do you address the concerns? How do you communicate with the people to make sure they feel like they have a voice?
Yeah, so this is certainly one thing which we felt was really important as part of our role in the project, was to really show that we were listening to what they said to us. And so whether this was concerns or if it was actually, we think this is amazing, we wanted to show them that, you know, we were actually listening to what they had to say. And then we sort of would make the point of sharing what we're told to the wider project to make sure that they're aware of what we're hearing within our interviews. And also from that, then we can act on what people are actually saying. So, for example, we had some people who were concerned with the masts, and they were asking us lots of questions about the height of the masts and where were they going, and they were seeing masts being put up already. But why was this happening? And so we had to make sure that we could then share these concerns to the wider project and then get them to kind of explain to us and the wider like community, well, what is actually happening in this area. And so to make sure that people could see that we were listening, we then organised some events. So we organised some online events. Obviously not everybody could access those. We did invite people to attend those by phone, but then as soon as we could, we then organised events, an event where we would actually go up to North Yorkshire following COVID like restrictions. We also had to send out information by post. So we tried to make sure we addressed every form of information sharing that we could to make sure there was information out there for people to have a look at, but equally they had somewhere to come and ask questions, so people could ring up the project, email the project, send in letters to the project, and they were addressed as well. Katie, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think the really important message here is to try and be as inclusive as possible, because a community doesn't speak with one voice. There, as you said, Paul, there are lots of different opinions, and Sharon's work with the community really revealed that very clearly to us. But there are some lessons that we learned as a result of this, which is to engage early and often. That's absolutely critical, and using those multimedia, so working with community events, working with parish councils, through dedicated project website, but not everybody has access to the website. So using more traditional methods such as newsletters, mailings, and sometimes we did also use social media too for those that were connected. All this helps raise awareness for the project within the community, but having those channels back so the community can talk to us is really critical. Being transparent and honest is really important too. So you need some way of telling people when you don't know all the answers, because it's a project, right? So it's a research and development project around new technologies. These technologies are tested and safe and government regulated. So it's not that we're testing them on the people. What we're testing them on is how they connect to each other in these rural landscapes where the traditional things that stop digital signals connecting, the rocks, the trees, the landscape, which are hard to dig up and get round and go through, all those things are working. And so it's joining these two bits of the project together. So working with the community and listening, and quite rightly, as Sharon says, really making sure we're communicating that with the project so the project can make changes, and then we play those changes back to the community to tell them what we've done and why, showing how we've listened and how we've made changes. Those were all central to making this community engagement work.
So you talk about community engagement, and Sharon, you've already mentioned COVID, which of course came up whilst this project has been ongoing. What particular challenges has COVID presented to you in terms of carrying out the project?
Well, certainly from the interviews point of view. So our interviews were had to be done by phone or on video conferencing. So that was a bit of a challenge to a certain extent, because actually some people had very bad, as I've said before, very bad broadband. So trying to do like a video conference was not always ideal. And actually some people's landlines as well were really bad. So I did have like an instance where I had to literally, there was one phone call and it became so crackly that we had to stop the interview and then start again. But it also had an impact on the wider project in regard to the community engagement as well, because I think we were there as a project, but we couldn't actually physically be in the village. And so I know there were sort of challenges with regards to our like community engagement work that was going on. Do you want to add something to that, Katie?
No, I think all that is quite true, and there are many challenges with working remotely, but I think we also got some advantages. So the thing that surprised me was actually how intimate a one-to-one digital interview can be. I guess at the beginning we're so used to doing these types of interviews face-to-face, where we quite often either be in somewhere like a town hall where people could visit us, or we might even visit people's houses and with their permission we'd arrange a slot and do the interview face-to-face. But what we found in the digital space is actually people quite quickly opened up. I guess another point of COVID is that we all began to use digital much more, so we got used to it quite quickly. I think one thing that was difficult is where we did rely on telephone calls and that you were missing those visual cues. So it's harder to pick up when people are concerned about something, because quite often if they're concerned, you can see a change in their body language and you can miss those hints on telephone calls. But on the whole, I think they worked better than I anticipated. And it was a good data set that we've got that's really informed our project.
So we've talked a lot here about the engagement with the community, but of course the Many project has involved lots more people than just those within the community. You've been working with social scientists, there's technical teams, there's the local authorities, lots of people from different social worlds coming together as part of the Many project. How important is that, Katie, to the way it works?
So I think that's really important. So what you've got in what we call a social world is you've got normal ways of being, right? So it's the taken for granted assumed ways of acting. So when you're in the local authority, you know how the local authority works, you know how decisions are made, and you understand normal protocols and ways of being. Equally, when you're in a community, you know how your community works. Equally, when you're in social science, you know what the scientific norms are. But none of those worlds know what the other one does. So when you're trying to do a big complex project in quite a condensed period of time, you've got to keep revealing to the other world how the other one's working. And in that way, you start to knot where the potential problems are or the misunderstandings are, which are almost inevitable. It's well illustrated by the difference between the social team on the project, which were concerned with trying to make the use cases work. So which tourism people are we going to work with? Which groups of tourists are we going to take them through the process so they can experience the apps and the digital connectivity, those sorts of things. And then the technical team who put up the masts decide what radio frequencies, what radios will be there, making sure it fits with the regulation, making sure that it's tested and it works and that it does then what the tourism operators want it to do. So there's all these little bits to knit up and knot together, and then you're plonking that into a community, into a place where those people may or may not think it's important to them. And so letting them know what's happening is also really important. So what Sharon and I both discovered is we became what we call knowledge activists. So we were going across the project all the time, trying to tell the people from one group what the other group were doing, from one world what the other world were doing, what they were thinking, what they were concerned about, and what they felt needed attention. And sometimes actually we discovered gaps. We call these institutional voids, actions or practices that aren't taking place that do an important job that makes the project work. And sometimes we actually discovered good things that people were pleased at and are starting to happen. And so we shared those two and tried to celebrate those so that everybody could see how the project was adding value to everybody involved in it, the project members and the community. And of course, we have to do this in a context. So when you're working in a place, there might be other things happening in that place that you're not in control of as a project. So there might be other planning permissions from other providers putting poles up in the area, but the community don't see that or know about that. They might think it's you putting up those poles that you haven't told them about. So that transparency and openness, revealing what you don't know, offering to find out and then sharing knowledge back with them becomes an absolutely crucial part of the project. If these people in the communities are going to adapt these technologies, pay for these infrastructures through the services that they buy and become this flourishing socio-economic community because they have access to these technologies.
Sharon, did you see in the interviews you were doing, did you see trust building as the project went on and as you communicated more and more with these people and they began to realise you were telling them everything you could tell them?
That's a really good point and really interesting point, actually. So at the very beginning of the interviews, the people that engaged with us were very interested in the project and really keen to get involved in the project. And then we had this kind of dip where actually people became a little bit more, well, what is 5G and what's really going on here? And then that then enabled us to respond and then to organise some meetings. And then it went a little bit quiet, and then more people then became back involved again. So we kind of had this journey. We feel like we've had this journey with this online community where they've actively become more open with us. As like Katy said, some of these interviews have been incredibly like revealing. They've really wanted to share how they feel as well as just talking about the technology. So as the project's moved on, yeah, we certainly feel we have brought in some more trust into this. They're beginning to trust us as a project, but equally being more willing to share their concerns as well. Yeah.
Katy, you already mentioned that there's going to be gaps, there's going to be holes in any plan that you make. And how do you go about repairing them on the move and moving forward and adapting the project so that it still can succeed, albeit it might even be succeeding in a different way that you hadn't previously imagined?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Sharon is the perfect artist at this. She's a brilliant connector across these different worlds. So as I said before, it's about making different social worlds transparent to each other, so that the technical people can understand the social problems, and that the people working to identify the social problems can understand the challenges that the technical team face. So there are always technical glitches. So you have to be really clear that you don't make promises to the community that you can't fulfill. You have to share your uncertainty with them, and that's true about whether the equipment will work, the functionality of the equipment, and also the timescale within which you can get it in place. So all those are real challenges that projects have to deal with. The other thing we think is really important is developing this peripheral vision. So you're understanding what else is going on into the community and how those things are affecting the everyday lives, because it's really easy to talk about, well, there's the businesses involved in the use cases, and then there's the community members who live in the community. But of course, some of those are the same people. They're people that live in the community, that run a business in the community, that have kids that have been educated in the community, and this connectivity is working crisscrossing all over those different paths. So it's quite a complex web of things that you're trying to unpack. And so our analysis of the social data that Sharon's been working in such detail on has helped us to see some of the patterns that are emerging and what really matters. And I would strongly urge other projects to look for those patterns, what messages are coming up again and again, and what's reoccurring, because those are the things that you really need to pay attention to. And that gives you an opportunity to, if you like, do this repair work where there might be a communication that's broken down, or a meaning that's been attributed to something incorrectly, or an understanding of a technical object that could or should be different. And sometimes that raises as questions and concerns. Sometimes it raises as objections and campaigning against. And all these are legitimate, real life, real feelings of the community that need to be taken into account. So the more you can do that, I think you're in a much stronger position to come up with solutions that don't please everybody, but that work for most people and that are practical and useful.
And while this project has taken part in a rural community in North Yorkshire, isolated areas, I guess there's lots of lessons that can be learned here that can be applied to projects anywhere, any geographic area. Katy or Sharon?
I think that's absolutely true. So in our white paper, we do list what we think are best practice lessons learned that we hope we can share with other people. And actually, we're also going to be organising a workshop in late July where we're inviting people from other projects to come and share their experiences with us. And in the white paper, we pose a number of questions about their projects and how they've experienced these types of issues, so that we can collate learning from other projects and bring it all together, and hopefully learn together as a community of people trying to help rural communities connect.
So, Sharon, how have you been able to help people better understand the project, 5G generally, and the potential benefits of it to their area up in North Yorkshire?
So this has been working in several ways. So it's either partly through the interviews where we actually can get to talk to people, but then it's quite often actually because from what people have said to us that then we can then as a project then kind of act on like what they've said. So it has been very much about sharing knowledge about the project to the community, but also getting them to be involved in the project as well. We're moving forward on this project with the community, and so it's really important for us to emphasize that we want their input to help move this forward in the best way that we can. So to show that we're doing that, to show that we're listening, but also to actually work with the project, and as like Katy said, actually share our learnings from this project for other 5G projects, and to move that forward as well, particularly when you're sort of wanting to engage with the community. So this like knowledge sharing around the project in place, but also the project within the project, and then the project across other 5G projects that are happening, not just in like rural areas, but across the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, Katy, I'm sure people listening, anyone who's familiar with responsible research and innovation, the RRI framework, will surely recognise that that has played a part in the Many project. So can you tell us a little bit about how you built that into the work and how you found that to be useful and how that's paid off?
Yeah, so from the formation of the project, we've talked about this as an RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation project. And Responsible Research and Innovation has 4 principles built into it. The first and perhaps most important is inclusion. So right from the start, you're involving these multiple forms of expertise. So as you said before, Paul, this is the scientists, the business practitioners, who have a commercial interest. They have to make money from this at the end of the day once they've tested the technologies so that it's viable and sustainable for the future. But also policymakers who are making big investments to make sure our rural communities don't get left behind. And it's working together. So we're working really closely with DCMS on this project and informing them and keeping that transparency going as we go through the project. And the other 3 principles are we're using that collective to anticipate, to respond and to reflect on what's happening. So we're seeing the project as an unfolding process, and we're creating these junctures where we stop and reflect. We anticipate what's going to happen next. And then as we progress with that, we try and do the best actions. But as new information comes in, we respond to that information, we stop and reflect again, and then we anticipate the next and move forward. And it's that iterative cyclical process that is helping us stay on track.
So let's see, how can you see the benefits already of the work you've done from the work in the community? Can you see you've made progress already, albeit the project is not finished yet?
So Sharon had a very exciting visit to a racing yard recently, where they're putting new technologies in to help track horses. And one of the big problems with the horses on the gallops is if a jockey gets separated from the horse is loose. It could be dangerous both to people, to cars, and to other horses, and etc. And so they're investigating using these technologies to track horses, spot them quickly, and take interventions that create safe environments. Is there anything else you'd like to say on the racehorse example, Sharon?
Just to say, it was, well, one, it was an absolute like privilege to go and see these horses and to be so close up to them, but also yeah, this also came through some of the interviews as well as in like regards to safety. And so, and again, this is like highlighted, this is like one example. So for example, if the jockey becomes like separated from the horse, what are the implications there? And then we can actually use like technology to actually help with that, so to speed up the response time. If so, for example, if the rider was injured, that like response time of actually being able to call in the emergency services would be much quicker than what it was before. So it's those kind of things to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other thing with that is to think about that it sounds like a sort of luxury horse racing for the rich sort of thing, but actually it's a fundamental part of the community in this part of the world and a really important part of the economy. There are other tourist sites too, and lots of country walkers out that could also value from connectivity, reducing the number of people getting lost. So we're seeing real benefits come through from that sort of work.
Great. So I'll ask you first, Sharon, then just finally, sum up what you've learned from this project and how it's gone.
Well, for me, I mean, I've really enjoyed speaking to the community. So I've been quite, I guess I was quite surprised at the different type of experiences that people have been having, and being able to be part of that, and then to be able to share those experiences to the wider project. So for me, that's been a real like privilege, and I feel making a difference and making a change moving forward for the project. And
yourself, Katy?
So just to say something different from Sharon, because I completely support Sharon's sentimentality there, absolutely agree. But it's also been really important to me to see how hard North Yorkshire County Council are working with the government and with the grant bodies and with the NGOs, the non-governmental agencies that are also involved in this project, to do good for the community. I think sometimes there's a message that goes out there that the communities are having these things done to them, and North Yorkshire have been so open-minded and have listened and tried to listen so hard to what they can do to make things that work for the community with the community. And I think thinking about doing these projects with communities is really important and really powerful, and it stands to protect our rural communities into the future and keep those communities alive as we enter into these new digital worlds.
Brilliant. Well, Sharon, Katie, that's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.